Who has seen the movie Sneakers? A lot of you guys are probably too young for it. Sneakers does an amazing job of showing off social engineering. There's a scene where he's trying to get into a building and he doesn't have a security badge, and he convinces the guy by having his friend distract him with a fake delivery, saying, I've got to deliver this Drano. I've got 24 pallets of Drano that I got to deliver right here. And the guard at the gate's like, I don't know what to tell you. And Robert Redford's trying to get in and says, can you just open the gate real fast for me? And he's like, okay. And he lets him in. It's a fun scene. It takes about a minute. And they could have gone with some sort of technical hack where they break into the system and they convince the security gate to open at just the right time. But what they did was what I consider the fun way, which is social engineering. And we'll talk more about that, but I wanted to go over some of the more technical things first. Let's see. Oh, exploits. The proper name for a hack is generally an exploit. You found a way to exploit something that the programmers neglected. So they locked all the doors, but they, oh, I'm not even showing you my slides anymore. They locked all the doors, but they left a window open. And you, the hacker, have a ladder, and it was easy. There's different flavors of hackers out there. They talk about white hat and black hat hackers. White hat being the good guys, like Sneakers, the guys that are getting paid to test systems and look for exploits. And then the black hats are the guys that are like hacking the DNC, getting the emails from John Podesta, and the guys who are just malicious and looking to make money. Security firms, well, software firms will always, not always, they'll offer bounties for exploits. If you can find something and report it to Microsoft or report it to Adobe, they will pay you for finding this exploit. That's their way of encouraging white hats to help them out. And if it works out, they have time to make a patch, to fix the hole, and Microsoft would be so regular as to release stuff every second Tuesday of the month, so much that it became known as just Patch Tuesday. And it was bugs getting patched, but it was also security getting fixed, security holes. This is, in my mind, the equivalent of like, you've got a condition that's not dire, and so you can take your time scheduling when you're going to get your surgery, and it's not an emergency. The real problem is 0 days. These are the exploits that hackers find that they don't report, that they keep to themselves, or that they sell on the black market. And they're called 0 days because once Microsoft or Adobe or whoever finds out about it, they have exactly 0 days to get a fix out before it's affecting people in the wild. It's already affecting people in the wild. So that's an emergency situation for the software firm. That's when your patient is in dire trouble and they need to get to the emergency room right away. This is the best slide I could think of for emergency room. 0 days are extremely valuable. Government agencies, the Russians, the Syrian Liberation Army, whatever it's, or electronic something, they'll pay good money for these exploits for 0 days. And just to give you a ballpark, if you can find an exploit here for Adobe Reader, you could make between 5 and 30 grand. That's because it's fairly easy, I guess, to find an exploit for Adobe Reader. Whereas iOS, your iPhone, is much harder to hack, and so if you can find an exploit for that, you're liable to break in up to $250,000. One of the things that's interesting is if you use a 0 day, you are essentially throwing it away if it doesn't work. It's it's now able to be analyzed. Like, how did they hack my system? What did they do? And they can backtrace and figure out if they give it to the security firm, they can see, oh, there's this 0-day, there's this exploit that we didn't know about. And the Stuxnet, have you guys heard of Stuxnet? It was in the news 5-10 years ago. It was Americans and Israelis got together and put together a hack that broke centrifuges that were enriching uranium in Iran. It was this very highly sophisticated virus that they got in, and it would spin the centrifuge too fast for the machine, and it would break. And they broke like 1,000 centrifuges just trying to slow down Iran's nuclear program.
You said it was called Stuxnet?
Stuxnet, Stuxnet. And it's fascinating. It was an outright act of cyber warfare on our part. Right or wrong, it was impressive. And they used 4 different 0 days to get in there, which is indicative of how costly this endeavor was. What's interesting, the DNC hack, the Democrat National Committee, that John Podesta, the head of the DNC, got hacked, that used 6 0 days, which is indicative that this was not, some fly-by-night hacker getting lucky or anything. This was funded by somebody who really wanted to get in. Yeah, it was a lot of money that they were putting into that, either from hacks that they had themselves or from hacks that they bought. So, say you get hacked, your computer is now liable to be part of a botnet. Have you heard of botnets before? I don't want to rehash the things that are already familiar to you. Botnet is a collection of compromised computers. Your computer got hacked, and it's now able to be controlled by the bot master. So somebody who has hacked lots and lots of computers now has control and can use your computer to do nefarious things. They're very handy for like spammers. Somebody wants to send 1 million email messages. They could send it all from their computer, but when Gmail starts getting all these messages and they detect that it's spam, they can just block this one address, and now you're dead in the water. But if you've got 10,000 zombie computers that you can send from, Gmail can't block every single one of these addresses. They don't know who is a legit spammer and who is just a zombie, and so they have to come up with more clever ways to figure out what's spam and what's not. Another thing that could happen to you is ransomware, which is a fairly recent development, and it's really nasty. The hackers encrypt your whole computer, your whole hard drive, and keep the key for themselves, and then they say, you need to pay us, $500 or whatever they think they can get out of you in order to get the key back to unlock it. So you might see a screen like this that says, your personal files are encrypted, and you've got a little timeline there that says, you've got 57 hours to get us the money.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does that work on like the cloud too? Can you do ransomware on the cloud too? Or?
Conceivably, it's probably a lot harder the cloud servers are much more secure than Joe Blow, who doesn't know what he's doing, and he's opening attachments and emails and whatnot that he shouldn't have been touching. So one of the best defenses against this is to back up your hard drive in the cloud, because they lock up your whole computer. It's like they've secured it in a box, and they've got the key, and then they put a time bomb on top of the box, saying they're going to destroy all your data. Actually, it's more like they're going to destroy the key. But if you've got your stuff backed up in the cloud, you can wipe your whole hard drive and download it again. I use Carbonite, which is just a fantastic system. It's nice in my mind because if your house burns down, you still got your data someplace. You didn't have to run back into a burning building to fetch your computer. A couple of hospitals, well, several hospitals were hacked last year, and they paid the ransom. They were locked out of their patient data. And so MedStar Health paid 19 grand, Hollywood Presbyterian paid 17 grand. Like I said, all hard drives die eventually, so back up your stuff. All right. Other questions before I go on? I'm speeding through this stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so where is the market actually for a zero-day exploit? Are we talking like on Tor, like on Silk Road or something like that?
Yeah. So I always mix up which one is the dark web and which one is the deep web or the deep net or whatnot. One is referring to just all devices that aren't on the web. I think that's the deep net. So like you've got a baby monitor that is using the internet to talk to your phone and you can watch your baby through your phone and whatnot. That device might be visible to somebody in Timbuktu, but it's not. It doesn't have a website or anything. The dark web is all these nefarious sites. It's the black market like Silk Road and whatnot, where, in fact, you can just Google for exploit brokers. And they've got websites. I don't know how that's legal, that they can just have this presence and whatnot, but yeah, you can do business with them. And you don't have to be going through Tor and stuff, but it might be a good idea. We'll talk briefly about Tor.
So
Yeah.
I just have a quick question about ransomware. You mentioned that the hospitals paid the ransom.
How
So
did they pay?
No, it wasn't that. It's that. Does that mean that they're, let's call them honest enough, that they're actually going to unlock your computer after you pay it?
Yeah, they actually do, because they want it to be an established business model that, hey, you heard about us, huh? Yeah, you can trust us to give you the key back.
Okay.
So it doesn't cost them anything to give the key back. So
Follow up on that.
yeah,
They don't take the stuff off your computer though.
no,
They relock it with a new key later on if they want it.
they certainly could, but and in fact they might try to do that. But generally, once you've been hacked, you bring in a security firm and you manage to lock things down, and you're fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice. No, fool me at all. You're a bad person. I think that's how it goes. So they wise up and they lock down their systems and they back up everything, and it's harder to burn somebody twice. One of the things that software firms will do is they will publish their software as open source. And open source is valuable because it lets there be millions of eyes looking for holes in your software. So you're publishing your source code for the whole world to see, and you might think, say you've got a castle, you might think that it's fun to have a secret passageway to get out of the castle, a secret escape route, but a secret exit is also a secret entrance, and somebody can find that and can weasel their way in. And so that's called security through obscurity, and it's generally mocked by those of us who are like, well, that's not secure. It's just hoping that somebody doesn't find your door. It's like a bookshelf. You're just hoping that they don't hit the right book to open the secret passageway instead of just having a lock on the door. So open source is something that helps get more eyes looking at your stuff. You're publishing it to the whole kingdom, saying, help us nail this down and make this as secure as possible. I compare this to medieval garter robes. Who knows how to pronounce that word? They're the toilets of castles in the Middle Ages. It was basically a chute. You'd sit in the room up at the top, and your refuse would go straight down this little poop chimney into the moat or whatever. King Philip II managed to send some men climbing up the garter robe and out the bathroom. and they unlocked the gates, and he was able to take the castle. That's the kind of thing that's like, well, now that we know that trick, we're going to put bars across the guard road, and make sure that nobody else does that. So some firms will do open source and they'll let everybody see it. Other firms will keep their source closed source, and just hope that nobody finds any windows that have been left open. Another thing that a firm will do is pen testing. Stands for penetration testing. That's when you're hiring a firm, sort of like hiring sneakers, to look for holes in your system. Pen testers have just enormous tools at their disposal, and they're very clever. We had pen testers at my last company that were impressed that it was as hard as it was for them to hack in as it was, but they still managed to hack in. One of the things that they did, well, we'll talk about it when I get back to social engineering. One of the things that how hackers will get started looking for exploits, one trick they use is fuzzing, which is to put in tricky inputs looking for security holes. So I write a program that is going to divide two numbers. I get input for X, I get input for Y, and I divide X by Y, and I print it to the screen. It's a very simple little program. So you put in 6 and 2, and I divide 6 by 2, and I print out 3. Very easy. And then you're a jerk, and you put in 6 and 0, and I don't know how to divide by 0, because it can't be done mathematically, and so I barf. What's even worse is you might put in Z and 1, and now I'm trying to divide letters, and I barf. And so you never know what's going to happen if you don't.
Where does that start out at? You're saying you put that into the code or something? Wait.
So I wrote a program that, let me go back. I write a program, I'm the good guy. I write a program that takes in 2 inputs and prints out the output.
And you sell this program.
Yeah, I sell this program, or it's a web page. I've actually got several web pages that do math problems for you. You can put in, what is 3/2 plus 2/3, and it does the math. But I have to be careful because there are people out there that are going to be, what's 3/2 plus delete your database. That's one of the perils is you have to look for the bad inputs that they might put in. It's called sanitizing your inputs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Yeah.
So you're saying that if somebody was to do that by providing input that is not correct, then they destabilize your program on the back end.
Right.
And then there's a memory hole that you can go ahead and send something else through.
Yeah. They don't know what's going to happen exactly, but it could dump out something valuable to them. So in the case of like a program that they're able to download and decompile, we'll talk about that, then they're able to look for holes that they can then exploit.
You're going to talk about Heartbleed, because that's basically what they did with the security software. They gave it bad information. It would dump out variables to you that would have to be passwords. It could be passwords.
Yeah, Heartbleed was an interesting bug that, exploit that they found. It had been around for a long time, as I recall, and nobody had discovered it. And it let people put in information, and it would randomly drop bits of whatever was in memory back to the server or to the user. And then they can look at it and say, oh, well, this little bit of information you gave me happens to be the root password or something like that. Called Heartbleed. It was a fascinating little exploit that kept us up late at night at my last company. So decompiling. When I write a program, I'm writing it in words and symbols that are legible to me, that make sense, and for other programmers that can come look at it. For the computer to read it, it compiles it all down into machine language, or 1s and 0s. if a hacker gets a hold of it and he wants to know what it's doing, he has to decompile it. He brings it back from ones and zeros to words and symbols. And decompilers are easy to come by, and they have their uses, so they're not all naughty to use. You can't decompile a web page, though. A web page is running on a different computer somewhere else, and it's serving up data to you that's loaded in your browser. You can, though, right-click and view the source code. You can hit inspect or view source or something like that, and you can see all this stuff that, if you're not familiar with HTML, is a little perplexing. It's like, what is all this garbage? It's valuable to us web programmers because we're able to see, oh, this is why it's not working. I have this anchor tag in the wrong position or whatnot. So while you can't decompile a web page, you can still hack them in other ways. URL manipulation is changing the address in your browser bar to something tricky. So you're looking at your Gmail and you notice this is really hard to see, I'm so sorry. You see that there's this number up in the top on the right, a bunch of letters and numbers, and you're like, well, what happens if I change that number? Because that number represents a email ID, so the system knows, well, what email are you looking at? Oh, you're looking at number 1582879FDBC70F29. And so you, the hacker, you're like, well, what happens if I put in 3 instead of that? Am I going to get somebody else's email coming out? And if it's not a well-designed system, then yeah, you might see somebody else's message. Yeah.
So could a hacker technically go in with a URL manipulator and change something that, say, I would use all the time, and then send me to something that then links me to them and they can steal my info? Or how is that used?
How do they use URL manipulation in particular?
Yeah, for some kind of financial gain or to get your info or something.
So this is when I'm trying to hack into the server, not when I'm trying to hack into you, the end user.
Okay.
So I do this, and it gives me information on, well, in this case, Gmail is very smart, and they just say, the conversation that you requested no longer exists, which is sort of a lot, right? Because that conversation never existed. That ID that I put in was totally bogus. Well, the reason they do that is they don't want to give any information out that I could use to exploit them in any other way. Like, they could have said, that ID belongs to John at johnsmith.com. You're not John Smith. Now I know that there's a user called John at johnsmith.com. And I can start using that data and trying to hack that user. That's one of the reasons why you go to a website and you try to log in and it says username or password is not correct. And you're like, well, which was it? You know, why aren't you telling me? They're saying that because they don't want a hacker who's just guessing usernames to know that they nailed a username correctly. Because if they were saying just that this password is not correct sometimes, and other times they're saying that username isn't valid, then they'll know when they got a valid username. So they're very careful about what information they send back to you. Other questions? I don't know if I even fully answered your...
Yeah, I wasn't sure what it could give somebody here.
Yeah, so...
Can I ask back on decompiling?
Yeah.
What would that give a hacker? I just have, I did a book, I have this team of hackers, and I need them to be able to, they see people that have caught things on video, like on their phones or whatever, posted videos, and they want to take all those down. And then they want to ruin those people's lives. And so that's their job. They're literally hired to do that because they're trying to keep a secret.
Okay.
And so I want to use some terms and, I got this guy this way.
Yeah.
I got this guy this way. And social engineering is a neat concept that I want to do. But these guys are kind of on a floor in a building, and that's all, they're just computer geeks.
So, do they know who all the different owners are of the video, or they're targeting one particular person
They're
with
targeting
one
anybody
video?
that posts something up on any
Okay.
type of social media. So they kind of know. They're pretty much
They're doing
open. Like, hi,
individually,
I'm John. I posted this.
Yeah.
Type of thing. They know their name, but
So that
Posted already, isn't that already ruining the person that they're trying to do it though?
no, because it's like up. But then say they could find a way to maybe damage the code. Then when an actual person really looked into that, it was phony, or I don't know. Or is there a way to take it? What's that?
They want to grab it, manipulate it, and repost it.
Yeah.
I see. Let me think about that. Let's talk after and see if I can
Okay.
figure something out. Another thing with passwords, a good site won't be able to send you your password when you forget it. They always say, click here to reset your password, and they send you a link to reset your password, which is sort of a pain. I always wonder, why don't they just send me my password? You've got to know what it is. And the reason is, a good site is hashing the password. They take in your password, secret password 1, and they run a bunch of calculations on it, and it generates a hash, which is a value that they can then store. And the next time you go log in, you put in your password, and it generates the same hash, and they just compare the hash values. This is valuable because if a hacker does get in, and they're able to see everybody's username and passwords, they could then reuse those passwords on other places. They can log in as the user. But if they only can see a hashed value of the password, they can't then log in as the user because they put in the hash password and it just generates a different hash and it doesn't match up. The peril is generally not like your banking site. They're going to be smart and good, but if you're using like a brand new social media site or some fly-by-night dating site or something, they might not have good security. And you might not be using different passwords. And so they figure out that your email address has this password when they hacked in and they got your plain text password. And now they go to your banking site and they use this password that you reused. And they're able to get more valuable information out of you. Malware. What time we got? How are we doing?
3:30.
All right. You guys all know what viruses are. It's a program that attaches itself to other programs. It's just a snippet of code that will attach itself to other programs and replicate itself, and it does something bad. You would probably want to have antivirus software, which in my mind is sort of the biological equivalent of like washing your apple before you eat it. And antivirus software is pretty good at targeting existing stuff, saying, "Oh, that apple's covered in germs, don't eat it." And we'll talk briefly about why antivirus software isn't 100% reliable. You don't want to. I mentioned opening email attachments that are kind of fishy. Like you're getting an attachment from somebody you don't recognize. Who is this person? Or why are they sending me an executable file? I don't know if you guys know the difference yet, but that's sort of the equivalent of licking doorknobs in a hospital. So don't do that. Thank goodness for stock photos, because I didn't want to have to actually take it.
Lick your own doorknob.
Yeah, lick my own doorknob. Worms are basically like viruses, except that they are self-sufficient. They don't need another program in order to run, and they replicate themselves, and they do something bad. They'll talk about the payload of a worm or a virus, like what is it doing once it gets in. Another form of malware, Trojans, named after Trojan horses. You go to a website and you're like, oh, I need a program that'll edit videos. And this one's free, and it is free because they have all sorts of Trojans in there, and they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're not safe programs. That's not true of all programs, obviously. There's plenty of good freeware out there. But in some cases, that's where a Trojan comes in. It's software that you think is safe that then opens a backdoor onto your system. All this malware has a signature. It has DNA that is identifiable. And antivirus firms, when they discover a virus, they can look and see this signature, and they can then make a definition of signatures, and they send it to you and your system. Every time you download a new program, it goes through every single signature that they've ever found and make sure that it doesn't find those fingerprints on the program. The problem is that if somebody develops a new virus and it hasn't gotten discovered yet, you might get caught before it gets discovered and they've got antivirus fingerprint DNA signatures for it. And so antivirus software helps, but only so much. The heart of hacking is running your code on my computer. That might be my personal computer, or it might be the server that my company uses. The primary difference is, it's like the difference between robbing someone in a back alley versus robbing the bank. Sometimes they target individuals and sometimes they target institutions. SQL injection is a way that is something we always have to fight against, but it's complicated, so I'm going to skip it. Buffer overflow is another attack vector. It takes advantage of a program that doesn't know when to stop reading the instructions. It's gotten this list of instructions and it didn't say what the last instruction was, and so it just keeps on reading, keeps on going. Sort of like the king has sent a message to the duke saying, "You're invited to the royal ball, bring a gift." But during transit, a spy has grabbed this message and has added on his own thing, which is, "P.S. Please unlock the back gate to your castle." And the duke, if he's not savvy enough, will just keep on reading and be like, "Oh, it's all from the king. And I don't know why he wants to unlock the back gate, but here it is." Brute force, you might have heard of brute force is the hard way, basically. If you're trying to take the castle, brute force is like guessing the passwords. It's just your battering ram up against the front gate. You're just trying to get in. And you're pounding away and hoping to get lucky eventually. If you've got a 6-digit password, back in the day, 20 years ago, a 6-digit password was all we felt was necessary to be secure, right? And it could be all lowercase letters, which meant, there was 26 possibilities for each of the 6 characters, which meant there were 308 million possible passwords. It seems secure. But if you can try a different password every 100th of a second, because computers are very fast, it takes you 3 million seconds to try every password. It's about 35 days. But if you have a botnet, you can now say, you take the passwords that start with A, you take the passwords that start with B, and you can run 26 computers all at the same time. And so that's equivalent of getting a bigger battering ram. And now it takes you 1.5 days. Yeah.
Is that how they get around? Because I know most websites, if you try and do like another password, they'll lock you out. Try again in 15 minutes or something.
Yep.
So is that with the botnet? Is that how hackers get around that?
It's
it's coming from different computers, and so the server doesn't know which one to block.
Right. If they're doing their security right, they won't block based on where you're coming from, but it'll block the user. So you can't try this user again for 5 minutes. So we reinforce the gate. We require longer passwords. A while back they said, no, it needs to be 8 digits long. And it has to have a capital letter, and it has to have a number, which is good. So now you've got 62 characters. You've got 26 lowercase, 26 uppercase, and a bunch of numbers, which means there's 62 possible characters times, to the 8th power means there's 218 trillion possible passwords. And with your 26 computers, that would take you 2,500 years to try every single password.
Wow.
Here's the problem. People don't like using random letters. We like using things that we can remember. And so we use a word and shove a number on the end. And there's only about 10,000 common 7-letter words out there. And so just to use 7 and 8 as an example. And people usually just capitalize the first letter. It's just easier to hit that shift key on the first letter than to remember which letter was it in the middle of my word. And since people are usually capitalizing the first letter and usually putting the number last, 26 computers could get through in about 38 seconds. So that's why we use burning oil on those battering rammers. So that's what you're saying. We don't let people log in more than X times per second for a given user. If it's like you said, if it's by address, then if you have a huge botnet, then yeah, you could try more times. But if they're doing it right and they're saying this particular user can't be logged in, or like you said, they fail you completely and that your account is locked. Sorry, you can't get in until you call us. That's the less preferred method because I could go in and do a bunch of password filling. Did I share this story? Yes, I do. I called a girl in college, left a message, felt like a dork. So then I started calling her voicemail, trying to guess her PIN. So I could delete the message. Turns out, after 10 failed attempts, it locked her voicemail. And so I was talking to her later.
So you still did what you set out to do, though. She didn't get the voicemail.
Well, she eventually probably got it, but I talked to her later. She's like, "Yeah, don't leave a message. My voicemail's locked out for some reason." I was like, yeah. So the preferred method is to just slow them down instead of just locking them out, because anybody could come and lock you out. Yeah.
What happened with an old iPod Touch that I have that I hadn't used for a long time? So part of the screen doesn't work, and so I had a password that was on the opposite side. So I pulled it out recently, and so I'm trying to figure out that password, and then it locked out until I couldn't guess it anymore. So I had to plug it into the computer, put it in recovery mode, and wipe it, and then start over.
Yeah.
Which I have my new iPhone instead, so I don't really need it. But
yeah, no, I had a tablet that my daughters were playing with, and they were letting their 3-year-old cousin play with it, and she just found the password screen and kept putting in passwords until it said somebody's trying to hack this, and it wiped the whole device. That was unfortunate.
Well, better than that one time where I heard somebody, their kid got into the settings and changed the delay to forever and cannot log in until X time has passed. And it was several years.
Oh my
I heard about that one. That's funny.
gosh.
I have a friend that happened to, and so he hit the wrong password and locked it for 2 years. He's like, oh,
Nice.
great.
Nice.
You're cute,
So let's say they do get into the castle. One trick that administrators will do is they'll set up a honeypot. Honeypot is a big fake castle. It's a area of your server that they can't get out of, that they think that they've gotten into the files and they're all excited, and in reality it's been set up as a red herring. If it's done really well, then it's like they've just broken into a jail cell, because you now have their address and you don't let them do anything else from there on out. You know their address. Some other terms. DDoS stands for Distributed Denial of Service Attack. That's when you get all of your botnets to ping one computer or one website at a time. and the website just can't handle that much traffic, and so it either goes down or nobody else can get in.
Did that happen? I'm trying to remember. Was it an airline that happened to a couple months ago?
Yeah.
Happened to Twitter for 6 hours a couple weeks
Yeah.
ago.
Oh yeah.
Twitter got
yeah.
shut.
They shut down Instagram and a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and there are ways to combat that, but it's outside of my pay scale. Very expensive tools that detect when there's a DDoS happening. The Holy Grail is to get root access or root privileges. That is, you've made it into the castle, and now you've made it into the throne room. In fiction, you might hear someone say, "I'm root," or "I've got root," and it's like, yeah, if I've got a file that only I have access to, then the computer knows George can't see this file, but root can see anything. So social engineering, we're gonna have to rush through these. Social engineering, like I said, is the fun way. You're tricking people rather than hacking machines, and so there's more inherent drama in it. We'll skip the free Wi-Fi. Basically, I could have set up a hotspot on my phone and called it Marriott Guest, and anybody that's looking for Wi-Fi in the immediate vicinity could be like, "Oh, there's free Wi-Fi." And if I had the right tools on my phone, I can then see all their unencrypted traffic as it's going through my phone. That's a man-in-the-middle attack, and it's pretty nasty. I don't know the best way to avoid that. I guess, yeah.
Well, I have no idea if this feature is available on everyone else's phone, but there are two distinct icons on my phone, which is the little slashes for a natural Wi-Fi, and then these interlocked chains for like a hotspot.
Oh, interesting. iPhone?
Yeah, smartphone.
Okay. I wonder.
iPhone.
I don't think I've got that on mine.
Yeah, iPhones are smart and they know if it's another iPhone hotspot.
Wow, that's cool. Okay. Yeah, my smartphone's dumb. So, phishing. I'm not sure why it's spelled with a PH. I think it goes back to phone hacking back in the 70s. Phishing is where you send out a bunch of emails in hopes that somebody will get tricked. The pen testers at my last company, they sent out emails to everybody in the company that said, "Hey, we're setting up a new rewards system for the company. Log in at this website with your normal email, username, and password." And it was surprisingly effective. And we got a severe lecture. Spearfishing.
So they say log into this site?
Yeah, and then the other site, they don't hash the password. They just keep it as plain text. Now they've got your username and password, and they can log in as you.
That's how Podesta's got hacked.
Yeah, yeah. Spearfishing is where you're targeting a particular individual. Podesta was spearfished. Instead of just going out blanket to everybody, you are using terms like, "Hey, this is Joe from IT. I need you to reset your password," and you know that Joe works in IT.